Welcome to the Parties channel. Today we explain Prophets Judges chapter 15 in a clear and simple way, step by step. No, to really wrap our heads around the intense, action-packed narrative we're looking at today, we have to quickly look at the immediate context that set all of this off. Remember back in the previous chapter, chapter 14, Samson went down to Timnah and married a Philistine woman. Well, during the 7-day wedding feast, he gave his 30 Philistine companions a really difficult riddle. When they couldn't solve it, those guys secretly threatened Samson's new bride, basically forcing her to squeeze the answer out of him and tell them. Feeling completely betrayed by his wife and cheated by his friends, Samson struck down 30 men in Ashkelon to pay off the wager, and then he just stormed right back to his father's house in a total rage, leaving his bride behind. That deep friction and unresolved anger, that brings us right to the doorstep of chapter 15. We're going to walk through the literal text, verse by verse, looking at the Hebrew meanings, the locations, and exactly how this escalating conflict between Samson and the Philistine oppressors plays out. To give you a highly structured roadmap for our explainer today, here is the agenda we'll follow. 1. Context and the conflict. 2. The fiery fox revenge. 3. Judah hands Samson over. 4. The battle of the jawbone. 5. Key ideas and lessons. And finally 6. Our chapter recap. Okay, section 1. Context and the conflict. The wheat harvest incident. Looking right at verses 1 and 2, the chapter opens after a while in the time of the wheat harvest. Now hold on to that detail. The timing is absolutely crucial because it perfectly sets the stage for the massive agricultural destruction we're about to see. Samson decides he's going to go visit his wife, and he brings a young kid, a young goat, with him as a customary gift. Back then, bringing a young goat was a traditional peace offering, a gesture saying he wanted to reconcile and resume marital intimacy. He explicitly states his intention to go into his wife's chamber. But get this, his father-in-law utterly refuses to let him in. He offers a surprisingly frank explanation, basically saying, look, I genuinely thought you thoroughly hated her after how explosive that wedding feast ended, so I gave her away in marriage to your companion. And then, to try and smooth over this massive cultural and personal insult, the father-in-law offers him a replacement. He asks, isn't her younger sister more attractive anyway? Just take her instead. As you can imagine, this deeply offends Samson and acts as the spark that ignites this entire devastating chain of events. What we're seeing in these first 8 verses is a perfect illustration of the literary style of Peshat, the simple, literal narrative. It's built on a strict measure-for-measure consequence structure. We literally watch vengeance escalate step by step. Step 1, the father-in-law gives Samson's wife away to another man. Step 2, Samson responds to this localized family insult with a massive retaliation, destroying the Philistines' crops. Step 3, the Philistines escalate things even further. Instead of coming right after Samson, they retaliate by brutally murdering Samson's wife and father-in-law. And then step 4, Samson answers that murder with an unsparing, vicious slaughter. It is a tragic domino effect, and it really shows us how quickly personal disputes morph into devastating regional warfare when there is no rule of law. Moving right along to section 2, the fiery fox revenge, escalating the conflict. In verse 3, Samson flat out refuses the younger sister and declares that this time he is completely blameless if he does serious harm to the Philistines. The gloves are off. So in verse 4, he goes out and catches an astonishing 300 foxes. Now, I want to clarify a fascinating little Hebrew word here. The word used in the text is shualim. While it's traditionally translated as foxes, a lot of biblical scholars and linguists point out that shualim can also mean jackals. Why does that matter? Well, jackals run in large packs, which actually makes catching 300 of them a bit more feasible. Regardless of whether they were solitary foxes or pack-hunting jackals, gathering 300 wild animals is a massive testament to Samson's superhuman physical abilities, even before any actual fighting starts. He is prepping a highly calculated strike. And in verse 5, we see the execution of this wild plan. Samson takes these 300 animals and ties them tail to tail in pairs. Then he fastens a blazing torch to the center of every pair of tied tails. Once those torches are lit, he releases these panicked animals directly into the standing grain of the Philistines. Remember how verse 1 specified this was the wheat harvest? The dry season is at its absolute peak, and these crops are highly flammable. The fire just spreads like wildfire, causing total economic devastation. The literal text makes a point to detail the destruction of the shocks, the gathered sheaves of grain, along with the standing, unharvested grain, and even the vineyards and olive groves. This wasn't just him burning some wheat, he literally wiped out the entire triad of the ancient Mediterranean diet: bread, wine, and oil. It was a crippling blow to their livelihood for the whole year. Naturally, in verse 6, the Philistines are looking at the smoking ruins of their fields, and they ask the obvious question, who did this? It's actually worth noting the investigative nature of the Philistines here. They didn't just guess and they didn't immediately start attacking random Israelites. They held an inquiry. It highlights the organized, structured nature of the Philistine society, which is a stark contrast to Samson's rogue, one-man guerrilla tactics. Through their investigation, the locals tell them the truth. They find out it was Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, and exactly why he did it, because his wife was taken and given to his companion. Still in verse 6, we see a brutal and horrific response. Instead of going after Samson, the Philistines march up and burn Samson's wife and her father to death. There is a deeply dark, tragic irony here. If you recall chapter 14, she originally betrayed Samson's riddle to the Philistines specifically out of fear that they would burn her and her father's house down. Yet, that is exactly the terrible fate she meets now anyway. Moving into verses 7 and 8, when Samson learns of this murder, he vows that he won't stop until he gets his revenge. Verse 8 contains a really famous, difficult Hebrew idiom. The text says he smote them shulk al-yarik. Translated literally, it means he struck them hip and thigh. This is an ancient Hebrew idiom that basically signifies a ruthless total slaughter, an unsparing defeat. After this huge, violent physical confrontation, Samson retreats and goes down to dwell in the cleft of the rock of Etam, clearly seeking isolation. This brings us to section 3. Judah hands Samson over, internal division. Verses 9 and 10 show us that the Philistines are absolutely not going to let this slaughter go unpunished. They mobilize their military, march up, and camp right in the territory of Judah, spreading out near a place called Lehi. We'll see exactly why it's named Lehi in just a minute, as it translates to jawbone in Hebrew. The men of Judah, seeing this occupying army parked on their land, get nervous and ask, "Why have you come up against us?" The Philistines reply plainly. They are there to bind Samson and do to him exactly what he did to them. So, in response, in verse 11, a massive force of 3,000 men of Judah go down to the cleft of the rock of Etam. Just think about that sheer disproportion. An army of 3,000 men mobilizes to confront one single man. That's how intimidating Samson was, even to his own people. Notice the stark political dynamic revealed right here. When the 3,000 Judahites find Samson in the cave, they ask him this very question. "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us?" It tells us that the men of Judah are deeply, deeply afraid. They've completely accepted their subjugation. They aren't going to Samson to join their champion and start a rebellion against their oppressors. They are going there to turn him in. It's a tragic irony. The Israelites are acting as police agents for their own enemies, doing their dirty work out of sheer terror, just to maintain a miserable, fragile peace. In verses 12 and 13, Samson defends his actions with simple reciprocal logic. He tells his brothers, "Look, as they did to me, so I have done to them." However, he clearly doesn't want to fight his own people. He actually allows the men of Judah to tie him up to hand him over, but he sets one strict condition. He demands they swear an oath that they will not attack and kill him themselves. The men of Judah agree, promising they'll only bind him and deliver him into Philistine hands. The text makes a point to note that they bind him securely with avotim shadashim, 2 brand new ropes. There's no fraying, no weakness. They want to be absolutely sure he can't break free. This perfectly sets up the psychological weight of the betrayal and, of course, the magnitude of the miracle that happens next as they march him up from the rock. And that leads right into section 4, Battle of the Jawbone, the climax at Lehi. Verse 14 brings us right to the climax. As Samson approaches Lehi, he's seemingly helpless, bound by his own brothers. The waiting Philistines see him and come rushing out toward him, shouting in triumph. But at that exact split second, the literal text tells us that the Spirit of the Lord, in Hebrew, Ruach Adonai, comes upon Samson mightily. Throughout the book of Judges, whenever you see this specific phrase, the Spirit of the Lord, it always precedes a massive, supernatural burst of strength or leadership. Instantly, those 2 brand new ropes binding his arms suddenly become like flax that has caught fire. They just melt. They drop off his hands like burnt string. In a flash, his strength is fully restored, and he is completely free. So now, in verse 15, he's unbound but completely unarmed, standing right in front of an enemy army. He looks around and spots the fresh jawbone of a donkey. The text emphasizes that it was a fresh jawbone. That's actually a really important practical detail. An old sun-dried bone would be super brittle. It would just shatter into pieces on the first heavy impact. But a fresh bone would still be dense, heavy, and structurally sound enough to be used as a lethal bludgeon. He grabs this crude, improvised weapon and just wades into brutal hand-to-hand combat, striking down a staggering 1,000 men. The physical exhaustion alone of fighting 1,000 men with a heavy animal bone is almost unimaginable. It's a monumental, solitary display of power. Following this unbelievable slaughter, in verse 16, Samson actually recites a poetic boast right there in the text to summarize his huge victory. The real beauty of this verse is found in the original Hebrew wordplay, which is kind of tricky to translate smoothly into English. In Hebrew, the word for donkey is chamor, but the word for a heap or a pile is rooted in a similar sounding word. Samson's poem goes, Bichulchi hachamor, chamor, chamor time. He's making a brilliant pun, essentially saying that with the jawbone of a donkey, a chamor, he has piled them into heaps upon heaps, chamor time. In verse 17, to clarify the geography here, the text states that once he finishes his poetic boast, he tosses the jawbone away. He then names that very location Rameth Li. Translated into simple English, Rameth Li literally marks the place as Jawbone Hill. He's naming the geography itself as a permanent physical memorial to the crude instrument of his incredible victory over the oppressors. Now, verses 18 and 19 show us the immediate aftermath. Following this massive exertion, the adrenaline totally crashes, and Samson becomes incredibly thirsty, to the point where he honestly feels he is going to drop dead. He cries out to the Lord with this desperate question. He acknowledges that God granted this great deliverance by his hand, but he pleads for water so he doesn't just perish right there and fall straight back into the hands of the uncircumcised Philistines anyway. God answers his prayer by miraculously splitting open a hollow place right there in Lehi, and water gushes out. Samson drinks, his spirit returns, and he revives. Because of this, the text demands we clarify. Samson names that spring En-Hakkore. In Hebrew, En-Hakkore translates to the spring of the caller, or the spring of him who cried out, forever marking his complete vulnerability and reliance on God. Let's move to Section 5, Key Ideas and Lessons, Grounded Takeaways. So what can we actually take away from this? Let's look at the crucial, practical life lessons we can extract purely from the literal narrative we just walked through. First, we clearly see the highly destructive, escalating nature of revenge. A personal dispute over a marriage leads to burned crops, which leads to murder, which leads to a massive regional slaughter. Retaliation often just creates more ruin, spinning entirely out of control. Second, we witness the profound tragedy of internal division under oppression. Think about the men of Judah. They were so broken by the fear of their occupiers that they sent an army to arrest their own brother. Fear causes people to turn on their own community rather than stand united. And finally, the text clearly demonstrates that true strength relies on a higher power. Samson was bound and helpless until the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Even after his greatest victory, his immense physical power meant absolutely nothing against the simple vulnerability of human thirst, forcing him to rely entirely on God for his survival. Section 6. Chapter Recap, the chronological flow. Let's do a quick final summary to trace our steps. We moved chronologically through 20 rapid-fire verses of cause and effect today. We started with the family dispute during the wheat harvest. That sparked Samson's fiery retaliation, using the foxes or jackals to destroy the Philistine economy. The Philistines responded by brutally burning his family, prompting his unsparing slaughter. We then saw the deep betrayal by the men of Judah as they bound him with new ropes just to keep the peace. And finally, we witnessed the miraculous victory at Rameth Lehi, where the ropes melted, one man defeated 1,000 with a fresh jawbone, and God provided this spring of En-Hakkore to save him. Verse 20 concludes the chapter by telling us that Samson went on to judge Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. This whole sequence really leaves us with a profound question. If a man with unparalleled physical strength can be brought to his knees by simple thirst, where does true, lasting power really come from? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.